This is CES Tech Talk. I'm James Kotecki. The most influential tech event in the world is back in Las Vegas, January 5th through 8th, and we are here to preview CES 2022. Today, the future of the final frontier, specifically enabling humanity to begin new civilizations beyond Earth. It's not the opening line of a new sci-fi series, it's the tagline of a real company, Sierra Space. The company recently announced a partnership with Blue Origin to build a private space station called Orbital Reef. Let's find out more with Sierra Space VP and GM Space Destinations, Neeraj Gupta. Neeraj, I have so many questions, but first, help us visualize and understand how this looks. When we talk about Orbital Reef, should we be thinking about the International Space Station for comparison?
Yeah, great question. And what we're looking at building is it builds off that foundation, but think of it completely reimagined. The way we're developing this is really around the end user experience, right? Getting people access to space and any type of person can get to space. So, the way ISS is developed now, it's really kind of a laboratory in space. And if you've seen pictures on the interior of it, you can see it's really built like a lab. It's got a lot of wires and connections and equipment in the middle of the hallways. This is going to be a completely different experience. This is a place you want to go to. Think of like a 5-star resort anywhere around the world. That type, those types of amenities and significantly more capability to help really bring in the future of what we can do in space.
So I'm thinking for interior design, it's more Star Trek, The Next Generation, less Battlestar Galactica.
You got it. That's right.
But what does it look like from the outside? Is it still the same basic construction of you got pods and you got giant solar panels, or does it look different?
Yeah, no, that's different as well. So we start with a system called our Life module. And it's a large inflatable system. Think of it as basically a 3-story building that we can put inside of a 5-meter fairing and launch it into space, and then it expands out to basically a 3-story building, 27 feet in diameter by 27 feet long. So the pods or the modules you see on the International Space Station are much smaller than that, basically a fifth of the size. So you can kind of get a bit of a comparison. And so the way we develop this is multiple of those Life modules up there, as well as using our space plane. We have a system called our Dream Chaser space plane, which helps ferry cargo and crew back and forth from the Orbital Reef. There are a couple other modules that are there as well, but again, think of larger sized modules, places you can get multiple people in and out of.
So why are you building this?
Yeah, good question. Well, the reason we're building it is really because we see a really vibrant LEO space economy developing. We're right on the precipice of where we see a lot of interest in space. You can see it all over the place with a lot of investment in the sector now. And really,
you almost said in the space, didn't you?
But in the space, that's right. Yeah, exactly. You gotta separate.
You gotta catch yourself. Yeah,
exactly. No, so we really do see a vibrant economy there developing. Space has really been dominated by governments over the last 20, 30, 40 years, and really what we're seeing is we're right on the edge of turning this over to a commercial usage. And you see all these different types of technologies, from fiber optics to in-space manufacturing to things we can use on the ground, having people go to space. You see all this tourism excitement, people now traveling in. There's the inspiration for mission that just happened and where we had the first non-astronauts flying around the world. So this is really a big area that's starting to develop, and that's really the reason why, because we see this as really the natural extension of the global economy.
So the space station, Orbital Reef, it sounds like is for anyone who wants to go to space for any number of reasons. You could have tourists, you could have governments, you could have private companies that want to conduct experiments in a weightless environment. Is it really that broad of an audience that you're targeting?
It really is. You said that perfectly. It's really for anybody, and we're trying to make space accessible for all. not just for governments, not just for the ultra rich, but for anybody. Our goal is to have thousands and millions of people living and working in space, and be able to really experience that. And like you said, it's really open to whatever you want to do in space. From if somebody has a killer app of developing a new technology that can only be done in microgravity, we want to be able to enable that development, as well as, like you said, the tourism, continue research. We think there's a lot of secrets that can be unlocked in space. There's a lot of research around pharmaceuticals and the life sciences and cancer medications, things like that, right? And really, space offers a lot of ability to unlock some of those things we haven't been able to.
You mentioned that now space is no longer the province of just governments, but it does bring up an interesting question about government regulation and law when it comes to something in space. So if you've got people from multiple countries who are living and working in a space station, are there existing laws or legal frameworks that actually govern how that kind of society operates?
Yeah, they're in work, so they don't necessarily exist, but we're working through exactly what those regulations look like. And frankly, every country has some different regulations around them. We're working with countries around the world to develop what that looks like.
So tell me a little bit more about how you're building this on the ground and how it's going to actually launch. So it's a bunch of inflatable modules. Is there a set limit to the size that this thing can be, or can you kind of keep adding modules indefinitely as this kind of spacefaring community grows?
Yeah, so it's a combination of these inflatable modules as well as some hard shell modules. And the way we develop it is so that it is modular and you can really extend it as much as you want. So we've got what we call a core module where we can attach multiple additional modules to it. And really there's no physical constraint to be able to add more and more of those modules together. So you can think of it as really limitless possibilities of extending how big you can make it in one location or potentially multiple locations.
Wow. What other assumptions have you had to rethink, or maybe put a different way, have you been able to rethink because you're no longer tethered to this is a government entity doing a kind of public sector facing job?
Yeah, it opens up a lot of different things you couldn't previously do, because of the government nature of things like ISS. Going to a commercial system really allows us to think about how do we make a real tourist experience around the system, right? What do people want to do when they get there? When you have a government run facility, well, it's done as we're going to go do science. We're going to go do research. We have a specific mission in mind. When you go to the beach, you don't necessarily have a specific mission in mind, except for enjoying what's there. So we started thinking about, well, how do you make it a place where tourism can really flourish? You can also start thinking about things around IP and being able to protect IP. So like you said, developing different products in space. That's something that you can't do now because of the way the International Space Station is set up. Independent companies, it's much more difficult to be able to retain your IP. The other part is how you manufacture in space. Different things you manufacture can sometimes have different types of byproducts and things like that maybe need gassing, or outgassing or venting of the system. Well, we can do that. We can now do that with a free-flying space station, especially the way we've made this modular. We can really enable some of those systems. And you can think about industries that are high-polluting industries on the ground. Now we can move some of those things to space, get them off the ground, still get the benefit of them, but not do the damage to our environment.
So in some cases, it would actually be less polluting to send up the space plane and go to the space station and produce those kinds of things in space than it even would be to not launch that, but to do it on the ground.
That's right. Exactly.
Before we go any further here, I have to ask a question that I'm sure most people listening to this are thinking. When will this be ready? Give me some timelines of some notions of tangibly when we can actually expect to see this come to fruition.
Yeah, it seems like it'd be a long way away, but really it's not. It's we're looking at before the end of the decade. So late 2020s is when we're planning to have it up and operational.
In the classic tradition of spacefaring soundbites, right? Before this decade is out.
That's right. Exactly.
So will there be any kind of health restrictions or age restrictions? I mean, my 7-year-old, I guess, will be a little bit older by the end of the decade, but I'm sure he'd love to go to space. Will we see, I mean, speaking of Star Trek, will we see kind of families going in space together? I mean, if I'm a tourist, I want to go with my family, I suppose.
Yeah, absolutely. No, we're looking at allowing space for anybody, from the young to anybody who may be a little bit older. These missions can be, or these tourist excursions can be on the week of days to weeks. And come back, and so really, there's not a lot of restrictions on who can go. We're doing a lot to develop what type of training that person might need on the ground, and we'll actually provide that training as well. But really, there's not any restrictions around that.
So tell me about some of the hypothetical experiences that a tourist in space might be able to have.
Yeah, you can think of a lot of experiences, and one of the things that we're developing is a thing called our Astro Garden technology, which is really growing plants in space. So think about a restaurant in space. You'll be able to eat food that you grew in space and have a view of the Earth while you're doing it. Which is I think a pretty spectacular thing when I think about it. Also experiences. We're looking at, you want to experience space for space. So you get the microgravity and floating around and doing things like that as well. But also maybe even going outside of the space station. What they call extra vehicular activities, EVA, is basically, getting in a spacesuit and getting outside and doing a spacewalk. We're working with companies that are looking at different types of ways to do that, not necessarily with big spacesuits, but can be in a shirt sleeve environment. So there's a lot of different pieces you can do around that.
So what you're describing sounds amazing, super exciting. I believe you, but I almost want to figure out like more ways to actually prove out that this is really going to happen by the end of the decade. So let's talk economics. Like, let's talk what this will actually cost. And honestly, frankly, like how you make money, because I think if we can understand how the economics might make sense, it might give everybody kind of more confidence to understand that this is actually really happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So, the economics around it, how much it costs, it costs significantly less than what the ISS built. The ISS was over $100 billion to go build it. We're less than one order of magnitude less than that. To go put this in orbit. So you can, we've taken really advantages of all the things we use every day and frankly probably take for granted every day, but they're really enabling for what we can do in space. A lot of the automation that you see every single day, your home automation, all the edge computing, all the things that is available to us on the ground, we can now use in space, really helps us on the operations side of this and really bringing down the costs. When you talk about the, kind of the revenue streams and how does that kind of work overall? Well, we actually see, if you look at what people are paying to go put their names on lists to go do a few minutes in space from a tourism perspective, and what it would be to put circle the Earth a handful of times. Comparatively, we're offering things like a 3-day stay or 2-week stay in a 5-star hotel. So we've done we've run their numbers on what those are. We've got folks that are interested in being tourists on a space station. Also, there's a lot of things you can look at from what we call space to ground products and space to space products.
Right.
Space to ground products are things that you build in space and we can use here on the ground. And like I said, these are things that, you can move things that are maybe high polluting industries and bring them back to the ground. So there's a lot of industries that really are around that. And you can think of things like drug manufacturing. Is a big one where you can create drugs in space that you can't create on the ground because of the form of microgravity. Cancer research is a big part of that. One thing we know is you can't grow a tumor on the ground in 3D. You can only grow it in 2D. Whereas in space, you can actually grow it in 3D and really unlock how really you might attack that or cure that type of disease. So there's a lot of real benefits to what we can do here on the ground. And then there's the space to space segment, which is, instead of building everything on the ground and launching it and putting it in space, well, how about building it in space? Mm-hmm. We don't build a building in, overseas and then put it on a barge and ship it to its final destination and install it, right? You take the raw materials and you build it in place. So we're looking at those types of industries as well.
So you're talking about a space station and a transportation method for getting there that seems to be more modern, more advanced, lower cost than the traditional government alternatives. What role do you see for the private sector versus the public sector in space going forward? I mean, if what you're talking about is true, then we should see an incredible boom of private sector activity in space, vastly eclipsing, to use a space term, anything that the government does or has done. What's the continuing role for government, if any, going forward, do you think?
Yeah, I think the government will still have a very strong role in space, and really exploring further and further out, right? So you start in what we call low Earth orbit, which is where the ISS is now, and start going further out to the moon, to Mars, to asteroids. Start exploring those destinations in space compared to what we've now been in for over 30 years. So there's still definitely a role for governments in this whole architecture, and then also what we enable is those further out destinations like Mars, for instance. That's about somewhere between an 800 and 1100 day mission to get there. Well, the first time you go do that, you're not going to go do it on your way to Mars, right? You're going to go practice that and develop it in low Earth orbit, so you're near home and you can come back. And we can do that at our commercial orbital reef as well. So we can really enable governments to go further and really stretch the boundaries and areas we want to explore.
Do you see a future where the average CES attendee is going to be able to tool out to the desert, hop on one of your vehicles, and take a quick trip to space as an exhibit?
Oh, I'd love it. In fact, I'd love to do a CES in space. What do you think about that?
I'm into it. I'll be there with you. What are you actually planning for CES 2022?
Yeah, so we're planning. This is our first time of being at CES, so it's it's really exciting for us. And CES is really a platform where we see all of this coming together. Like I said, a lot of the enabling technologies to allow us to do it. So we're really planning a lot of fun things. We're going to display our full scale Dream Chaser model out at CES, and we encourage everybody to come to see that. That's, like I said, our space plane that lands on a runway. This is one of those technologies that is very different than what we've done in the past, where people splash in oceans. We can take you right down where anywhere a 737 lands, and take you right back to an airport. So we're going to have that on display. We're also going to have a display of our life module there as well. So there'll be a smaller version. It's not the full three-story version, at least not this time, but hopefully soon. And then also some VR showing the full experience of what the orbital reef is, and you can fly through it, float through it. You can see kind of all the different modules and what's in there.
So CES is all about the private sector. So don't take this question the wrong way, but science fiction sometimes paints a picture of a overly commercialized space that's almost kind of crass, right? And there's like McDonald's floating around the moon or whatever it might be. So do you feel any kind of responsibility to your users, to your customers, to your tourists, to kind of preserve that sense of awe in what you're building?
Yeah, we are really going to kind of preserve that sense. There's the one side of making sure that we can enable commercial businesses to come up and really further the use of space, which we're very much committed to. But at the same time, we want to make sure that you get the experience of space. Right. It shouldn't look like a modern city anywhere in the U.S. You should be in space and looking down at the earth and looking at the stars and being able to really immerse yourself in those things. So yeah, we definitely are cognizant of that and making sure that we can really maintain that.
This kind of luxury, widely available space experience really has been the stuff of science fiction up until now. Are there other lessons, inspirations, or warnings that you take from science fiction as you're building this out in real life?
Oh, that's a good question. Well, but probably not put enough automation where the space station can take over and lock you out, right? That's
That's rule number one, basically.
Maybe that's rule number, yeah, exactly. Is let's not do that. No, honestly, it's from what has actually happened in space on the ISS, on what we've seen in exploration, on getting people to the moon. That's really where we've drawn quite a bit from, it's we're taking the best of the best things we do here on the ground, from experience, from safety, from all of those types of aspects, and really taking that space. So that's really what we're drawing from.
So the end of the decade is when you foresee this kind of being operational, fully operational. What are the milestone markers along the way to achieve that? As far as both the space plane and the space station, what should we be looking for in the next few years?
Yeah, so look for our space plane to be flying toward the end of next year. So that's the first piece. We have 7 missions going to the ISS to take cargo, using our Dream Chaser, and then coming back and landing on a runway. So we're going to start that service at the end of next year. So you'll see that as one of the first pieces. And we're looking for doing some demonstration testing and ground full scale prototyping, those types of things with our life systems over the next couple of years as well. So you'll see a lot of that happening, and we plan on putting that out to have people be able to actually come and experience them. Hopefully we can bring it to a CES or have people come and be able to see that in person.
And the space plane, I believe, is going to be autonomous, right? Will there be pilots for that?
No, you're right. It's autonomous. There are not going to be pilots in there, so it's a fully autonomous system. So once it gets to the International Space Station, it berths to that system, which means it basically uses the robotic arm and attaches to the system. And then on its way home, it's all autonomous. We use propulsion systems and onboard navigation to bring it right back down to the runway.
But what you're doing is so cool. And I am just so excited to try and take a trip in this in the future. Are there other people in this sector, this space, who are making a go of it as well? I imagine that you may not be the only company doing this, so I don't need you to give, name your competitors necessarily, but how do you see yourselves as different than other people who are presumably also racing to build the future of space?
Yeah, it's a good question. There are definitely other people that are interested in this. I'll tell you what's very unique about us is there are a few things. One is we're partnered with Blue Origin, and we have a shared vision of what we see as being space, and our vision is to have thousands or millions of people living and working in space in the near future. And really that's kind of our guiding principle. So, when you take that and couple it with the technologies that we own, and frankly, we're one of the only companies that owns the technologies to really enable it. So our life module systems, we've been developing that with NASA. We actually originally developed it for deep space missions, for going to the moon, going to Mars. And we've been developing that for over 5 years now with NASA, and that's pretty unique. Other companies are trying to purchase those capabilities where we actually own and develop those. Same thing with our space plane. It's my opinion, it's definitely the preferred way. I would want to go to and back from space. I would much rather land on a runway than land in the ocean or anything.
And do you take
like
off
that.
on a runway too with that, or is it kind of the same vertical orientation that we're expecting from a space shuttle?
Yeah, it's the latter. You
Okay.
you still are kind of like a space shuttle. We go on top of a heavy lift launch vehicle, and then come back to a runway.
I want to come back to the tagline of the company, the mission of the company, I suppose, which is on your website. I'm going to quote it: enabling humanity to begin new civilizations beyond Earth. That's reflected in what you've been saying today in terms of people, not just working in space, but living there. Is what you're talking about with this technology going to get us to the place where people are actually living in space? I mean, are you talking about babies being born in space, families living their entire lives in space? Is that really the long-term vision?
Yeah, we see that as being a very viable option. Our vision is to make sure people are there and enable the ability to get there and get back to the ground. But yeah, absolutely. Seeing people living in space, like you said, babies being, potentially born in space, and continuing to develop that. Is absolutely something that we're interested in. I won't say it's the founding principle of what we're doing, but it would be a great day to see that much interest and civilization moving that way.
And I imagine going to other planets as well is potentially on your roadmap.
Absolutely. And, we developed our life technology, like I said, for deep space applications originally, so that you could be around the moon or going to Mars. Also have developed it to be used on the lunar surface. So when you talk about civilizations and building those out, we see the moon is absolutely an area that is ripe for that as well.
So if we've got the space plane and the space station by the end of this decade, are we going to be permanently based on the moon by the end of the 2030s?
I think the end of the 2030s is possible. When you're looking at what NASA is doing with the human landing systems and getting people there, back to the moon and toward the end of this decade as well. And looking at doing sustainable landings, meaning multiple drop downs to the lunar surface and back and forth. I absolutely think it's possible.
Has working at this company made you want to live in space more or less than when you started?
I would have to say more, definitely. When I started here, these things, like you said, felt very far out there. They were things that you kind of thought of, and we have a lot of astronauts in our company that have experienced those things, and you think about it from that perspective. But no, seeing what we're building and seeing it's we're right there, toward the end of this decade, it definitely makes me want to do it.
And speaking of that perspective, I mean, if you could get thousands or millions of people getting that quintessential Earth from space view, astronauts come back and say that it changes them, on a deep and sometimes very spiritual level to understand the Earth from that perspective. So what you're doing could have a much harder to measure, but also very real impact on that too.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I'll tell you, one of our astronauts, Janet Kavandi, she mentions that all the time, that it's very transformational. It was for her when she went to space, and that's one of the things that drives her, and she always relays back to us every day is making sure that people really feel that, because it's something you can't explain. It's just something you have to experience.
Well, I, for one, and I'm sure many of our listeners, cannot wait to experience it for ourselves. Thank you so much for joining us today, Neeraj.
Great. Thanks, James. Appreciate it.
And we will see you at CES 2022. And we hope to see you there as well. Thanks so much for listening to this show. Remember, there's always more tech to talk about, so subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss a moment, and get more CES at ces.tech. That's ces.tech. Our show is produced by Tina Anthony and Kirsten Hyzak, recorded by Andrew Lynn, and edited by Third Spoon. Special thanks to CTA's John Lindsay for the studio help. I'm James Kotecki, talking tech on CES Tech Talk.